Hello, my beloved demon darlings. I would be happy if you could leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. Thanks. Let's get scared. The Mimic. Moving into a new house was supposed to be exciting. A fresh start for me, Mary, and my husband, Ryan. We had been saving for years and finally had enough to get our dream home. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a cozy 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It had a charming vintage feel to it, with a white picket fence and a lush garden. I could already see myself sitting on the porch, enjoying the sunset with a cup of tea in hand. Things started off great. We spent the first few days unpacking and decorating, setting up our new life together. But soon, the house didn't feel as welcoming as it first had. I started noticing strange things. Small things at first, barely enough to raise concern. One evening, Ryan and I were sitting in the living room watching TV when I heard the sound of footsteps upstairs. It wasn't a creak or the house settling. It was distinct, heavy footsteps, like someone was walking around. I paused the show and looked at Ryan. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" he replied, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "The footsteps upstairs. It sounded like someone walking around." He shrugged. "It's probably just the house settling. Old houses make weird noises, you know." I nodded, not wanting to make a fuss, but deep down, I knew what I heard. It wasn't the house settling. Over the next few days, the noises continued. Sometimes it was footsteps, other times I'd hear whispering, like someone was having a conversation in another room. But when I'd check, there'd be no one there. Ryan, of course, thought I was being paranoid. "Mary, it's an old house," he'd say every time I brought it up. "You're just not used to the sounds yet." But then things started getting weirder, more personal. One evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard Ryan call my name from the living room. "Mary, can you come here for a second?" "Yeah, just a minute," I called back, finishing up chopping the vegetables. I wiped my hands on a towel and headed into the living room, but when I got there, Ryan wasn't on the couch where I had last seen him. In fact, he wasn't anywhere in the room. "Ryan!" I called out, confused. No answer. I checked the hall downstairs, but he wasn't there. Panic started to creep in as I realized something was wrong. I hurried upstairs, where I found Ryan in our bedroom, sitting at the desk, working on his laptop. "Why didn't you answer me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ryan looked up at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "I've been up here for the past hour. I didn't call you." My stomach dropped. You didn't just call me from the living room." He shook his head slowly, his brow furrowing. "No, I've been up here the whole time." I backed out of the room, my heart racing. I knew what I had heard. I knew Ryan had called my name. But if it wasn't him, then who or what was it? That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every sound had me on edge. I kept expecting to hear my name again, but the house remained eerily silent. A few days later, I came home from work early. I had a splitting headache and decided to take the rest of the day off. When I opened the front door, I heard Ryan's voice coming from upstairs. He was talking to someone. It sounded like he was on the phone. I dropped my bag and headed up the stairs, curious. But as I reached the top step, the conversation stopped abruptly. I called out for Ryan, but there was no answer. I walked into our bedroom, where I had heard his voice coming from, but the room was empty. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Ryan. Running late. Be home in an hour. I froze, my blood running cold. If Ryan wasn't home, then who had I heard? I bolted out of the house and waited in my car until Ryan got home. When he arrived, I told him everything. This time, he didn't brush me off. He could see how terrified I was, and for the first time, he admitted that he had also been hearing strange things in the house. Voices, whispers, footsteps. But like me, he had convinced himself it was nothing. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "Something isn't right." Ryan nodded. "Let's stay at a hotel for a few nights and figure out what to do next." We packed a bag and left that night. But even in the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was like the house had gotten under my skin, like it was still with me, even though we were miles away. The next day, we went back to the house to grab a few more things. Ryan went upstairs while I stayed downstairs to gather some papers. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard his voice again, calling my name. "Mary, come upstairs for a second." I hesitated, my heart pounding. Something about the way he called my name felt off. It was his voice, but there was something wrong with it, something unsettling. I took a deep breath and slowly made my way up the stairs. As I reached the top, I saw Ryan standing in the hallway, his back to me. "Ryan?" I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't move. "Ryan?" I repeated, a little louder. Slowly, he turned around, but when I saw his face, I froze in horror. His eyes. They weren't Ryan's eyes. They were cold, empty, like two black holes. He smiled, but it wasn't my husband's smile. It was something else, something twisted and wrong. "Mary," he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "Come closer." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. You're not Ryan," I stammered. The thing wearing my husband's face took a step toward me, its smile widening. "Come closer," it repeated. I turned and ran, bolting down the stairs and out of the house. I didn't stop until I was in the car, locking the doors behind me. I sat there, shaking, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. That thing in the house. It wasn't Ryan. It wasn't human. When Ryan came out of the house a few minutes later, I flinched, unsure if it was really him. But when he got in the car, his eyes were normal again, and I knew it was my husband. We never went back to that house. We sold it as quickly as we could and moved into a new place, far away from that neighborhood. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear Ryan's voice calling my name. And every time I hear it, I wonder if it's really him, or if the mimic has found me again. After we moved out, we learned that the house had a history. Previous owners had reported strange occurrences, voices, footsteps, doppelgangers. Some said the house was haunted by a mimic, a malevolent spirit that takes on the appearance of loved ones, luring its victims into a false sense of security before striking. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or mimics, but I do know this. Whatever was in that house wasn't human, and it's still out there, waiting for its next victim. So, if you ever hear your name being called, if you ever see a familiar face but something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Get out. Because once the mimic finds you, it won't stop until it has you. It wasn't me. It started off as a normal day. I was sitting at my desk, working from home, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my wife, Sarah. "Hey, you're home early. Didn't hear you come in. What's for dinner?" I frowned, glancing at the clock. It was only 2:30 in the afternoon, and I hadn't left the house all day. I texted back, "What are you talking about? I'm still in my office." She didn't reply for a few minutes, and I started feeling uneasy. Then the message came through. "Very funny. You were just in the kitchen. I saw you." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't left my office. I stood up, slowly walking toward the kitchen, my breath shallow. As I reached the doorway, I froze. There, standing by the stove, was me. Same clothes, same messy hair, same everything. It was like looking in a mirror, except this thing was real. It turned its head and smiled at me. The smile wasn't right. It was twisted, too wide, almost like it was enjoying my fear. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. My doppelganger didn't say anything. It just stared at me, its smile fading into a blank expression. Without breaking eye contact, it walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, toward my wife. "Sarah!" I screamed, rushing after it. But when I reached the hallway, it was gone. Sarah was upstairs, oblivious, looking at me in confusion as I stood panting in the doorway. "What's wrong?" she asked. But all I could do was stare down the hall, where that thing had vanished. I never saw it again after that day, but sometimes, when Sarah isn't looking, I catch her watching me with a strange expression, like she's not quite sure if I'm me either. The other me. It all started on a Monday morning. I was getting ready for work, the usual rush of finding my keys, packing my lunch and getting out the door on time. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the radio in the kitchen. My husband Dylan had left early for a work trip, and I had the place to myself for the next few days. I liked the solitude usually. As I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack near the front door, I glanced at my reflection in the hallway mirror. For a second, I froze. My reflection looked normal. Jeans, a blue sweater, my brown hair in a loose ponytail. But there was something off about the way it moved. When I stepped forward, it didn't match my movement exactly. It was like there was a fraction of a second delay, something just barely noticeable, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I shook my head, laughing at myself. "I'm just tired," I muttered, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, and I soon forgot about the strange mirror incident. But that night, things got weirder. I had finished dinner and was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a noise from upstairs. It was subtle at first, like the sound of a door creaking open. I muted the TV and listened more carefully. There it was again, a soft shuffling sound coming from the second floor. My heart started to race. Dylan wasn't home, and no one else should have been there. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and slowly made my way up the stairs. My footsteps were cautious, barely making a sound as I reached the landing. The sound seemed to be coming from the bedroom. I hesitated outside the door, listening. My breath caught in my throat when I heard something inside. It was breathing. Deep, slow breathing. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I twisted it slowly and pushed the door open, expecting to see an intruder. But when the door swung open, the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, just as I'd left it that morning, and nothing seemed out of place. I stood there, confused, trying to figure out what I had heard. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned my head toward the closet, and my blood turned to ice. There was someone standing there, half hidden by the shadows of the open closet door. At first, I thought it was Dylan, his height, his build. But then I realized it wasn't him at all. It was me. My own face stared back at me from the shadows, my eyes wide and blank, my mouth slightly open as if in shock. It was wearing the same clothes I had on, jeans and a sweater, and its hair was tied in the same ponytail. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear as the other me took a step forward, its eyes locked on mine. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was like I was frozen in place, trapped in my own nightmare. The other me tilted its head slightly, like it was studying me. Then, without warning, it smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was twisted, malicious, like it was mocking me. And in that moment, I knew this thing wasn't me. It was something else, something wrong. Suddenly, it spoke. "Why are you here?" The voice was my own, but distorted, like it was being played through an old broken speaker. The sound made my skin crawl. My voice cracked, barely audible. I couldn't form a sentence. Before I could react, the other me lunged forward. I screamed, stumbling backward and falling onto the floor. I braced myself for the impact, but when I looked up again, the doppelganger was gone. The room was empty and the closet door was closed, just as it had been before. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran downstairs and locked myself in the bathroom, shaking uncontrollably. What the hell had I just seen? Was I going insane? I stayed in the bathroom for hours, too terrified to come out. I kept expecting to hear the other me again, to see it standing there, waiting for me. But nothing happened. The house was silent, eerily still. The next morning, I told myself it had been a nightmare. I had been tired, stressed, and my mind had played tricks on me. That had to be it, right? But over the next few days, the doppelganger kept showing up. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of it in the mirrors, always just for a split second before it vanished. Other times, I'd hear footsteps upstairs when I was alone, or hear my own voice whispering from another room, saying things I couldn't make out. One night, I was in bed trying to sleep when I felt the mattress shift. My eyes snapped open, and there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was the doppelganger. Its back was turned to me, but I knew it was me. I could see my own hair, my own silhouette. It was just sitting there, motionless, like it was waiting for something. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I was terrified that if I made a sound, it would turn around and I'd see that twisted smile again. Minutes passed, maybe hours, and eventually, the doppelganger stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't sleep at all that night. I knew I couldn't stay in the house alone anymore. The next morning, I called Dylan and told him everything. He was skeptical at first, but when he heard how scared I was, he agreed to come home early from his trip. When Dylan finally got home, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but that relief was short-lived. As we were sitting in the kitchen that evening, talking about what had been happening, I heard something upstairs. It was my voice, clear as day, calling Dylan's name. "Dylan, can you come up here for a second?" the voice said. Dylan froze, his face going pale. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Karen, you're right here," he whispered. We both stood up slowly, listening as the voice called his name again, more insistent this time. "Dylan, come upstairs." He shook his head, backing away from the stairs. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "It's the doppelganger," I said, my voice trembling. "It's been following me." Dylan grabbed my hand, and we ran out of the house, not stopping until we were safely in the car. We drove to a hotel and spent the night there, too afraid to go back. The next morning, we called a paranormal investigator, a woman named Margaret, who specialized in dealing with things like this. When she arrived at the house, she immediately sensed something was wrong. "There's a presence here," she said, walking through the house with a strange, focused expression. "It's been feeding off your fear." Margaret explained that the doppelganger wasn't just a ghost or a spirit, it was a mimic. It took on the appearance of people, using their faces, their voices, to confuse and torment its victims. And the more afraid we were, the stronger it became. "It wants to replace you," Margaret said, her voice grim. "It's trying to take your place." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The thought of that thing living my life, wearing my face, made me feel sick. Margaret performed a cleansing ritual in the house, burning sage and reciting prayers. It took hours, but eventually, the house felt lighter, less oppressive. The doppelganger didn't show up again after that, and we hoped that it was finally gone. But even now, months later, I still get nervous when I catch my reflection in the mirror. Because sometimes, just for a split second, I think I see something else, something watching me. Doppelganger in the kitchen. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and I had the house to myself. My wife, Nancy, had gone out for lunch with friends, leaving me to catch up on a few things around the house. The silence was nice, a rare moment of peace. I had just finished cleaning up the living room when I heard the familiar creak of the back door opening. "Nancy, you're back already?" I called out, expecting her to answer, but the house remained eerily quiet. Curious, I walked toward the kitchen, where I heard faint sounds like dishes clinking together. As I stepped into the doorway, I saw Nancy standing at the sink, her back to me, quietly washing dishes. A sense of relief washed over me. She must have come home early and just wanted to get a head start on chores. "Hey, didn't expect you home so soon," I said, but she didn't respond. There was something strange about her posture, the way she stood too still, too quiet. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was tired or just didn't feel like talking. Still, the air felt heavy, like something wasn't quite right. "Everything okay?" I asked again, but still nothing. The unease began to creep up my spine. Her silence was unusual, especially since she never ignored me. I took a step closer, but before I could say anything more, I heard the sound of the front door unlocking and swinging open. I froze. A moment later, I heard Nancy's voice, cheerful and casual. "Hey, I'm home. I picked up a few groceries." My heart dropped. Slowly, I turned to the kitchen, expecting to see no one there. But no, she was still at the sink, washing the same dishes. Panic gripped me as I stumbled back into the living room, just in time to see Nancy walk in, holding grocery bags, smiling like everything was normal. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the look on my face. I pointed toward the kitchen, unable to speak. You were just..." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I rushed back to the kitchen, but it was empty. The sink was dry, the dishes untouched. The faint smell of dish soap lingered in the air, but the room was still. Nancy came up behind me, confused and concerned. "What's going on?" she asked. I didn't know how to explain it to her. I didn't know what I'd just seen, but I could feel a chill lingering in the air, like the echo of something that wasn't supposed to be there. From that day on, I never felt comfortable in the house again. Even Nancy noticed how uneasy I became. There were nights I swore I could hear footsteps in the kitchen, or the faint sound of dishes clinking when no one was there. But I never saw it again, whatever it was. It still haunts me. Was it just my imagination? Or had something, or someone, been mimicking my wife that day? Whatever it was, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt deliberate, like it had been waiting for me to notice. And now I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had gotten just a little closer. The other half. When it first started, I chalked it up to the stress of moving into a new place. I had just bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, a fresh start after a recent breakup. The house was old but charming. Tall windows, creaky wooden floors, and a backyard full of overgrown trees. It needed work, but I liked the isolation, the peace. It felt like the perfect place to get away from everything. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent most of my time fixing up the place, painting walls, patching up cracks, and making it feel more like home. But then small things started happening. At first, I didn't even notice them. I'd walk into the kitchen and find a cup in the sink that I didn't remember using. The TV remote would be on the couch instead of the coffee table where I always left it. A window in the living room would be slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed it earlier. Little things like that. Harmless things. Easily explainable things. I figured I was just distracted or tired. Moving was exhausting, and adjusting to the new environment was messing with my routine. But then, the incidents became harder to ignore. One evening, I was upstairs unpacking some boxes when I heard the front door open and shut. It was a heavy old door, the kind that makes a distinctive sound when it's pulled closed. I froze, holding my breath. I lived alone. There was no one who should have been coming in. I tiptoed down the stairs, each creak of the old wood under my feet echoing in the silence. When I reached the bottom, I found the front door closed, just as I'd left it, the lock still in place. My heart pounded in my chest as I checked the house, but nothing was out of place. Maybe I had imagined it. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same sound, the front door opening, then closing. But no one was ever there. I tried telling myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a draft causing the door to shift, but deep down I knew it wasn't. One night, things escalated. I had just gotten into bed when I heard footsteps downstairs. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth across the wooden floor of the living room. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone had broken into my house. The footsteps continued, pausing occasionally, as if whoever, or whatever it was listening too. The operator stayed on the line with me, telling me to stay put and wait for the police. I sat there, clutching my phone, barely breathing, when the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, I heard something even worse. A voice. My voice. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. It was speaking, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like someone was having a conversation, but with whom? And why did it sound like me? I sat frozen, my blood turning cold. The voice grew louder, clearer, until I could make out what it was saying. Come downstairs, I'm waiting. The voice was identical to mine, but there was something off about it, something cold, almost mocking. It was as if someone was imitating me, trying to lure me out. I stayed locked in my room until the police arrived. They searched the house from top to bottom but found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one hiding in the shadows. Nothing. They left, assuring me it was probably just my imagination or a prank. But I knew better. After that, the activity escalated. I'd hear my voice coming from different rooms, whispering, calling out to me. I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, like a figure darting just out of sight. And the footsteps, they became more frequent, more insistent, pacing up and down the halls at all hours of the night. Then one day, I came face to face with it. I was sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself with some TV, when I heard footsteps upstairs. I'd gotten used to the noise by now, so I tried to ignore it. But then I heard the sound of someone walking down the stairs. My heart pounded as I turned to look. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was me. Not just someone who looked like me, no, it was me. My face, my hair, my clothes. It was like staring into a mirror. But there was something wrong with it. Its eyes were darker, colder, and its smile, oh God, its smile was twisted into something inhuman. It stood there, watching me, that horrible smile on its face. "Why don't you come upstairs?" it said in my voice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The thing took a step forward, then another, slowly closing the distance between us. I scrambled off the couch and backed away, my hands shaking. "Get away from me!" I screamed. The thing stopped, tilting its head to the side like it was confused. Then, it smiled wider, its eyes glinting with malice. "You can't run from me. I'm already here." With that, it turned and walked back up the stairs, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak, every whisper made me jump. I knew it was still there, somewhere in the house, waiting for me. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay there anymore. But even now, as I write this from the safety of a friend's house, I still feel it. The doppelganger, the mimic. It's watching me. Nonhuman. It started the night my sister Jenny came over for dinner. We hadn't seen each other in months, and it was nice to catch up. As we finished eating, I excused myself to use the bathroom. I remember washing my hands, then hearing her voice from the hallway. "Hurry up, would you?" Jenny laughed. "You left your wine glass out here." I opened the door and walked out, but what I saw froze me in place. Jenny was sitting at the dining room table, calmly sipping her wine. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, confusion written on her face. "Why are you just standing there?" I looked back down the hallway. There was no one there. "I heard you," I stammered. "You were just in the hall." Jenny furrowed her brow, clearly unsettled. "What are you talking about? I haven't left the table." I didn't want to freak her out, so I just smiled, trying to brush it off. Must be hearing things. The rest of the evening went smoothly, but something about that moment clung to me, leaving an icy pit in my stomach. The next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. I'd hear footsteps when I knew no one was there, whispers just out of earshot, and sometimes I'd feel someone watching me. But it wasn't until a week later that things got truly terrifying. One night I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard the front door slam shut. I bolted upright, my heart racing. I lived alone. I got up and crept to the stairs, peeking down into the darkened hallway. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the bottom of the steps. It was me. It wore my clothes, had my face, even the same tired look in its eyes. But the way it stood there, staring up at me, was wrong, unnerving, like it was mimicking me, but didn't understand how a human was supposed to act. I backed up, fear gripping me, and ran back to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the nerve to open the door a crack. There was no one there. The next morning, I moved out. Thanks for joining our spooky story time. Bloody subscribe and keep the nightmares coming. Good night.